Welcome. Good afternoon. You're with the Economic Times. My name is Ashutosh Sinha. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this supply chain dialogue. Today, Mahindra Logistics presents Reshaping the Supply Chain Landscape, Leveraging the India Opportunity. So if there's any business that's been left untouched by the pandemic, I'm not aware of that. In fact, I suspect no one is. The scale and impact on each one of those businesses may be different, but they've all had to go back to the drawing board to rework their plans, both for the near term as well as the long term. And reworking those plans has meant an opportunity for businesses, with the financially strong companies having an edge in tiding over the opportunities. So for the supply chain infrastructure, call it the heart of any business, it has been an opportunity to build operational efficiencies and achieve better results. So basically, it's about re-engineering the way the companies are operating in current times. But India's supply chain industry is often spoken of as fragmented, maybe not efficient, because it's loaded with so much of indirect costs. The quality, well, a lot of people believe it deserves a lot to be desired. And finally, it also could do with a little more than a dash of technology. So more the technology, the better it will be. So if you thought of this as a crisis, it could just be the opportunity that the industry has been looking for. The crisis certainly has multiplied the opportunity and the geopolitical changes that are happening all around us. Several companies have announced their intention of relocating part of the manufacturing operations, well, some could say it whole as well, from China. And a number of countries, including India, are quoting those large companies to relocate their manufacturing operations to their countries. So, is this a crisis? Well, a lot of people would believe it's an opportunity. So if you're a professional who works in the industry, the supply chain part of it, definitely, it is time to listen to the leading voices on the subject. So let me welcome the experts for today's session, who you will get to hear over the next 90 minutes. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Dinesh Agrawal, Joint Managing Director, Panasonic Life Solutions. Amit Jain, Global CEO, Sterling and Wilson Renewable Energy Group. Sumit Gupta, Managing Director and Partner, BCG India. And I must mention here that he leads the industrial practice, the largest practice for BCG in India. Devin Chawla, Managing Director and CEO, Spencer's Retail and Nature's Basket. And Rampraveen Swaminathan, Managing Director and CEO, Mahindra Logistics. Thank you so much for taking out the time, gentlemen. Welcome to the Economic Times, and thanks for being with us today. So let me start the session and request Sumit Gupta, Managing Director and Partner at BCG in India, to set the context for the conversation. So just a reminder, we're talking about reshaping the supply chain landscape and leveraging the India opportunity. Sumit, it's over to you.
Thanks, Ashu. Thanks for inviting me here on a topic that's so close to my heart and also the talk of the town in today's time. India emerging as the next supply chain destination for the entire world. Let me share a few pointers on why I call this as my favorite topic. One, I think clearly from an India standpoint, the opportunity is very large. It's also growing. India has attracted FDI inflows of more than $27 billion during the first 4 months of FY22 itself. I know the base is a bit impacted by the COVID year last year, but it is a phenomenal 62% growth over what we saw last year around the same time as well. Mm-hmm. That coupled with the PMO actually aiding ease of doing business through the Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan, cutting corporate taxes, new labor reforms. There have been 9 new PLI schemes that have come in, which on an aggregate are worth more than $5 billion of incentives being provided to the manufacturing sector to actually, aid the opportunity and really become the global supply chain, destination for the entire world. This is being aided by a lot that's happening in the world outside India as well. If you look at the global trade, there has been a significant shift that's happening in the outside world. US, which is one of the largest, which is the largest economy in the world, has actually shifted, $40 billion worth of imports to Southeast Asia and India over the last 5 years. This is clearly evident across both their tech as well as non-tech imports. And this is forecasted to even further increase to over $120 billion kind of a number. And this makes it a very, very big opportunity for countries like India to actually monetize and capitalize on this scale. It is not just evident in few sectors, but this is actually a cross-sectoral opportunity that is coming visible today. We are seeing global firms in automobile, technology, chemicals, industrials, everyone wanting to de-risk manufacturing with a China plus one strategy. We've already seen announcements with world majors like an Apple, with TCL, wanting to shift manufacturing to India, not just for the Indian market alone, but actually also making this a supply base for the full world. We have seen several of large chemical companies around the world actually wanting to set up manufacturing base in India, which will serve not as a replacement to China, but will actually augment China and make it much more de-risk versus actually relying only on one nation and one geography. Ashu, you touched this point that COVID has actually shown us that in the worst of times, actually supply chain resilience becomes very, very important to follow. And that's something which the companies around the world are trying to do with this plus one strategy, which is not being reliant on the one geography for all their needs to be fulfilled. Other few things which actually make India even more attractive actually versus China as well, the strong cost competitiveness that has got developed over the last few years. Our hourly wage rates, monthly wage rates are roughly, I would say, 60% of China. We have the second largest workforce after China. And in fact, if you look at the next 10 years, with the aging of population in China, the number of people below 35 years will actually be the highest in India. We have a digitally empowered population, and this is very, very important in today's world. We have over 800 million internet users. This is really ideal for digital and tech industries, but it's also very, very useful for some of our traditional manufacturing sectors, which are now looking to break out into new ways of growing. It's also going to become not just a global export destination, but also, a big consumer market. Our average household incomes are expected to grow to 1.5 times, versus today in the next 10 years, whereby our, affluent and elite class bracket is actually going to grow even faster, moving to 2x during this time period. We have, several factors which will actually aid in this growth as well. If you pick up any manufacturing sector, any industry, whether it's auto, whether it's chemicals, whether it's textiles, if you actually look at the per capita consumption for India versus the entire world, we are at pretty minuscule levels. Whether it's number of cars, whether it's utilization of cement, whether it's utilization of steel, whether it's consumer durables per 1,000 individuals, we are at, we have a big gap, big delta versus developed markets. And that's something which will again propel manufacturing to grow in India. Lastly, I think, we have traditionally have this view that India is only good for global outsourcing. We are great in IT services. We control more than 55% share in the global outsourcing market. However, with, with the push by the government, we have now seen that we have strategic relationships with 50 plus countries through trade agreements. There are, several early harvest agreements being set up. And all this will again propel just the ease of doing business, not just in India alone, but actually across geographies as well. However, this is not all going to be very easy. there are a number of challenges that will actually face us to actually make this dream come true, whether it's in terms of resilience of the supply chain, whether it's in terms of fragmentation of our supplier base, whether it's in terms of digital penetration, whether it's in terms of really meeting global standards to the level at which some of the Chinese companies have been able to do. So with that, I would hand over back, Ashu, to you. I think, it will be great to discuss not just the opportunity, but what all can also be done to actually make this global supply chain destination really happen and happen fast. Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much for that context setting, Sumit. Now, that is a very interesting, because across those 5 broad areas, Sumit mentioned about the opportunity that exists for India. So let's open it up for the other experts in the group, and let me ask them about it. Since Sumit, you touched that point about the PLI schemes, and how can India put the best foot forward for the world to be here and make sure that they can come and be partners? Let me start by asking Dinesh Agarwal for it. Dinesh, what would your broad comments be?
Yeah, so I think taking from what Amit said, I think there are 4 areas where India clearly stands out as a supply base. Clearly, an inside-out economy, which means an economy which is built up on the domestic demand, right? I think that's a big enabler. I mean, imagine the Ola electric two-wheeler manufacturing. If you have a response coming in at the beginning of such large nature, imagine the kind of negotiation power and the scale of economy that can be achieved. So I think that's the biggest strength which India needs to leverage and sell out to the world, using its domestic demand as a base. So linking this to the PLI, obviously the government is kind of supporting in that direction. So industries which are strong here in terms of manufacturing, it's encouraging them to invest more, create larger scales. Of course, lots needs to happen in certain sectors where we are weak. Electronics, for example, I think that's a sector where we have to build up large capacities to bring those scale of economies. The second reason why I think India stands out is because of its geographical location. I mean, it might sound a bit off, but considering that the future markets are essentially of course South Asia, parts of Southeast Asia, Africa, and Central Asia. India stands out very well in terms of its geographical location, and hence as a supply base because the transit time and so on. The third thing which I've seen from my experience in Panasonic is that I think the cost of tweaking a design or redesigning is obviously very low compared to the developed world. So in which, what it means is that, with the engineering base that we have, the skill base that we have, and couple that with the cost, we can actually design products or redesign or tweak the products, for the world. And the last factor, which is important, as Amit mentioned, is, and it's clearly happening, is there's an anti-China, sentiment which is getting profound. And this is not just in data-intensive industry or where information is, critical. Data integrity is more critical. It's also happening in manufacturing industry. Just to be right on the right side of politically, our own group companies have come back to us in the last few months saying that they want to source products from us because till now they were sourcing from China, which is not getting accepted in the local markets now, right? And this I'm talking of, electrical, mechanical industry, right? So this is something that cannot be ignored, Ashu. Yeah.
Yeah, so that is something that, as Sumit also mentioned, we're also saying that is an opportunity. So then, what do we need to do? We'll come to that part later, but it's critical that we take the right steps. The policy part, again, some of those things we'll try and understand in a little bit. But what fundamental opportunities exist? Let me go to Amit Jain, and then I'll come to Devin Chawla also. Amit Jain, what are some of those opportunities that are emerging, which we need to seize quickly and then build on it as a country?
Yeah. So as everybody is like, thanks Sumit and Dinesh for setting the context, and they have highlighted that China plus one and our geographical location and domestic demand, they are the big factors which are driving India. And particularly I see the capacities. So we are the leading player in renewables, biggest EPC player outside China across the globe. And the question we faced during the pandemic, that there was no alternate to the supply chains for setting up the renewable industry or the solar plants outside China. So 1.5 years, we are not able to answer to any of our clients across the globe, what can be alternative to China if the supply chains are blocked there. So we see there is a huge potential which exists in the space, renewable space, and which is getting aided by the government in the form of PLI. And that industry will leverage. And I see that particular sector where if linked with PLI, we are able to set up vertical integrated plant, which RIL and Radani and likes of others are doing, and they're building capacities there. So there will emerge as a leader, and there's a huge potential which exists, which can be scaled up, and it will be in the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars. So that kind of opportunity lies ahead of us in renewables, pharma, and all other sectors, which we can leverage on and build our capacities. And building the capacities won't be enough, but we have to work a lot to improve upon our logistics and bring our cost competitiveness to match the China level. And that's the where opportunities lies to grow and expand and reduce the trade imbalances.
Okay, reduce trade imbalances. That's another factor, another very different factor that will come in. Rampraveen, would you like to mention about the big picture and also talk about how do we go about doing it? Because some of those points, some of those key movers, key points that policymakers need to do, and also the industry together needs to do.
Thanks, Ashu. And of course, I think Dinesh and Amit and Sumit have all set it up really well. So there's, I think, little doubt that there's an opportunity for the elephant to dance once again, right? That's kind of clearly there. But that said, as I often say, you can't make in India if you can't move in India. And there are some genuine challenges, I think, from supply chain and logistics perspective. There are things which obviously firms have to do and companies have to do, but let me talk, I think, more about the macro factors. I think first, I think India does need to have significant policy shift to drive a greater amount of multimodal transportation. We are still a very road surface-based logistics and supply chain system, which is highly limiting. And I'm sure for many of my colleagues in the panel, they would be living through that every day, right? But that's one significant area where I think we need to see a precipitated shift. I think technology-driven integration across different forms of supply chain in India, it will be amazing to really actually understand how many forms need to be filled to take something, to bring something into our country and finally move it into your facility. Right? It's quite humongous actually, and even though some of us in my industry make a living out of it, it's actually quite a significant cost. And the third thing I would say is that I think we do still need significant quality of assets and investments around logistics infrastructure in the country, right? Not just from a cross-border perspective, but even within the country. So I know the direct freight corridors need to be accelerated a lot faster. So the multiple set of things which need to be done. But now the good news is I think some of this has been recognized through the Gati Shakti program, which the Prime Minister announced earlier this year. But clearly we need to see the rubber hitting the road. For us to really be able to take advantage of the opportunity which presents our country, right? I think it's been 2 or 3 decades since we've had an opportunity like this. I'd like you to have an opportunity like this, but to leverage it, I think we need to work on some of the things I spoke about.
Okay, so let me also get Devin Chawla in the discussion, because we've referred to some of the disruption and his company, something that we cannot live without any day. A lot of companies do that job, but his company, because it directly impacts the consumer. Devin Chawla, this disruption that we're talking, what is your view on the basic traits of the disruption and the opportunities, if you can also talk about that, that it throws up for your supply chains?
Well, thanks, Ashu, thanks. I think let me put another angle to it. Everybody spoke about China plus one and international supply chain. And in Nature's Basket, we do buy a lot of our, even food is international food coming from all over the world. So undoubtedly, we've become better at dealing with these high probability, low impact events, such as like we used to technically, say defective product or delayed delivery of purchased items. However, today many operations are still vulnerable to these low probability and high impact events, and everybody spoke about how companies are de-risking from China. I think such high impact, unprecedented mass disruptions, Ashu, these events causes a lasting damage to supply chain. You can imagine we get our some of our produce, cheese, international food from all over Europe, and what would have happened during the pandemic. And in today's hyper-associated supply chain environment, I think risks are evolving at a compounding pace and can strike from practically any course, including that those are new and unforeseen, and this may not be the last one. So to me, supply chain is facing a twin challenge. I think a more uncertain world, something which players are trying to solve by maybe India as an option as being spoken about, and rising complexity in terms of scale, geography, especially for grocery or hypermarket business or retailers, assortment range, regulatory, customers are evolving demand and whatnot. I think, and I used to handle supply chain in Coca-Cola, and I'll tell you, that time it was all about network balancing and network optimization, where cost was go to decision making of SCM, supply chain management. And the whole task was to design the network chain and procure with lowest cost lever in mind. So cost took precedence. But I think the pandemic, and everybody in the panel has actually mentioned, has changed the equation, and a new variable will enter, and in fact has entered the decision making, that you can't put all eggs in one basket. Right. And if something goes wrong, entire chain will be disrupted. I think therefore the emphasis will shift away from cost cutting to risk mitigation. I think in going forward, the rules of the game will be to pursue both variables simultaneously, which is supply chain efficiencies as well as risk reduction. I think in this whole conversation is migrating towards risk reduction and looking into the future. I think it's about resiliency, which you mentioned, and an ability to adapt to the changes in the marketplace and new business models. I think that would be the key to proofing supply chain, which can create and embrace, few critical levers. Some of the things which I think we are working on, and I am also hearing other players working on, is I think integrating your supply chain network, ensuring supply chain visibility across value chain. You'll remember in the pandemic in the beginning, we actually had to integrate with our vendor partners like HUL, P&G, Colgate. So we have visibility. These were difficult times, and including building an insight. Your whole teams need to learn. So I will call it an insight-driven team. And thus an insight-driven business to tap into evolving market demands. Like for example, pack size changed. People were coming less to the store, but buying a larger pack because they didn't want to come and buy many times small pack. How would you react to it? How would the vendors, suppliers react to it? So I think all this, and by and large, above everything, a culture of preparedness for disruption, whether it is supply chain or business, I think going forward will take precedence.
Okay, so Dinesh Agrawal, the usually companies would reimagine, probably even redesign their supply chain by benchmarking against the peers now. The challenge for some of them would be that they would earlier benchmark it against the peers. Now, how are things different? Because you need to take a relook at everything. How does that happen, Dinesh? How would you put it for the emerging opportunity?
Yeah, so Ashu, I think, first of all, my apology to Sumit. I kept addressing him as Amit. I'm very sorry about that. I got mixed with Sumit and Amit. So I think my answer would be not specific to just my industry. And I think this holds true to what Devendra just mentioned. I think last 20 months have seen all kind of optimization possibilities, right? Which a manufacturer or a retailer could look at. I mean, there were situations where a certain market was closed, the manufacturing market was open, or vice versa. and this I'm talking across the globe, because some countries had pandemic at one point in time, closed at one point in time, open. So there was one aspect of that. There was a whole aspect of logistics, right? Containers not available, congestion at port, right? And and then there were clear shortages of material. I mean, copper getting short, aluminum getting short, plastic materials getting short, resins getting short. Now, of course, we can all debate about whether these were artificial shortages created, and I don't want to state this as an official position. This is my personal position, that perhaps there was a political strategy behind this. But why is it that when a country like China suddenly decides to become very conscious about carbon neutrality, the whole world goes flat? I mean, there are no electronic components available. You have to buy copper and plastics at a very high price. The price rise has been unprecedented, 60-70%. How are we going to get blackmailed by a single country? So I think this whole supply chain, which hit us pretty badly in the last 6 to 8 months, I'm sure is true for other companies, and they're asking this question as well: that are we going to get blackmailed by one country? And this is where I guess a lot of the answers need to be created. That does the government need to do something to counter this? Can it create we all know that the commodity prices today are not just guided by fundamentals; they're guided by commodity traders. So should we play a larger role in commodity trading as a government entity? How is it the government is going to insulate its manufacturing industry from such unpredictable factors, which are not natural in nature? I think that's a question which we are also asking ourselves. At present, we don't have an answer, right? Because there are certain materials where we don't have an alternative. We have to depend. I mean, solar, Amit would agree to that. We have reduced our dependency on China, substantially, more than 60% over the last 2-3 years. But then we know that whatever domestic material that we are buying, a lot of that you talk of solar modules, the cells still come from China, right? Prime Minister Modi is right, in his Atmanirbhar, focus and expectation, but it's going to take a while. You can't create cell manufacturing capacity overnight, right? Today, we are still dependent on China. We have to accept that. So those are the questions I don't have an answer to right now.
Sure. So Amit Jain, since the question of solar came up and the kind of renewables push that India is getting, 175,000 megawatts by 2022, and the bigger picture, 450 megawatts, a few years down the line, how are we looking to build capacity, and what are the right things that the industry needs to do?
So, as Dinesh has said, as at this point of time, nobody across the globe has answers towards that, and what is still looking at China in the short term. So there's no alternative to that. And India, under the PLI schemes and driven by internal demand and external demand, because whole of the world in the renewable space is looking at India as an alternative to China. So you go to any global major energy major in the world, they are heavily banking on India as an alternate supply, China plus one strategy. So in the long run, I say 18 to 24 months down the line, all the Indian majors will add significant vertically integrated capacities, which will be answering like the dependence on China. So in that case, India will be in a position to manage the internal as well as the external international demand. So that there we are like 18 to 24 months away from that scenario. And I think with the entry of Reliance, Adani and other majors, and it is the PLI schemes are also encouraging more and more industrial houses to enter into this arena. So I think 18 to 24 months down the line, we will start addressing that questions, and we'll be able to manage the global demands as well. But in the short term, there are no answers to that. And we have to depend on China for some time to go. And this will be causing disruption in the global renewable markets, because all the developers across the world are shifting their plans by 2 to 3 quarters. So all the major projects, because of the China has arbitrarily decided to increase the prices exponentially of the solar components. So all the major developers are shifting their plans to set up their capacities. So we see that it has not only disrupted supply, it has disrupted the rollout of the global green energy initiative, which has shifted by 2 to 3 quarters across the globe. And with the Indian capacities coming online, it will get streamlined.
Okay, so there's a question that is seeking answers. And of course, as you're mentioning, it'll take its time. So, but let's talk a little bit about the efficiencies part of it. From whatever little I read, it seems that India's supply chain as part of GDP is far more in terms of, if you look at the empirical part of it, there is room for improvement, should I say that? Almost, well, 2x of the global numbers. So how can we build the new supply chain? How can we rethink that supply chain so that we can prepare for the, to take on the bigger part of the global business?
Absolutely, it's a great point, Ashu, and we've been speaking to a number of our clients in terms of how do you really build resilience of the supply chain in terms of reliability, but also in terms of cost effectiveness, and that's a very, very important part. In many of the commodities, what we see is the internal cost of movements. It's easier to ship a good from, say, the West Coast to US versus trying to shift from West Coast to East Coast in India. And the challenges associated with whether it's wagon availability, the cost of transportation. I think many of these are, I'm sure the colleagues who are there in the panel discussion would be facing pretty much on a day-to-day basis. So it is a big challenge. I think there are number of things which are going on right now in that direction, whether it's in terms of the multimodal corridors that are being created, which will hopefully help not just ease the traffic flow, but also make it much more efficient. I think there is a full thought through process which many organizations and many companies are doing. I think there is a part which the government needs to do, which is happening. It's happening at a pace. It can obviously be faster, but there are things that are being done. But the organizations also are really trying to leverage right now digital and analytics to really try and see how the supply chain movements can not just become much more reliable, but also more cost effective as well. Whether that means trying to use multimodal modes of transportation, whether it's really relying on the right size of transportation trucks that you need to use, whether it's there are several new age startups who have come in who are trying to solve multiple of these problems. So it's a high focus effort that's going in that direction. But I think if you really think about it, it's not a problem that's going to get solved overnight. It is a problem that has got built up over last many years. Our manufacturing and consumption destinations don't match. Manufacturing is concentrated, whereas the actual consumption is pretty disaggregated across the entire country. There is imbalance between regions. There are certain items which get produced more in East, whereas more gets utilized more in West. So there's a lot of movement required there. And then, of course, there are natural resources which are only prevalent, in certain parts of geographies. So I think what this requires is really looking at, from a strategic viewpoint, at the overall movements and really prioritizing what areas to focus on. And while the broader questions get resolved, I think, each one of us has to contribute a little to actually making the, cost effectiveness really come through.
Okay, that's quite a bit of thinking that's needed. Just to remind for everyone watching us here and listening to us, in case you want to have your questions answered, please put them in for the person if you want to address it to a specific person here. And we'll try and pick that. We'll go through the questions and we'll try and include it in the conversation. So we look forward to your questions. Next, let me ask Devin Chawla for this. Devin, for supply chains, that word visibility and predictability, they are critical business imperatives. So how can policymakers and industry work together to build that when we are thinking of and looking to design the new system or even conceiving the idea?
Yeah, Ashu, thanks. I think you need to go back to the drawing board and see what is probably the global demand capacity, what is our share, like you had asked, Sumit, and what role are we playing, and can we, with all these schemes, how much of that we can address, including all these logistics parks and warehousing, including supply chain. I think need to go back and reassess, because this pandemic is at least once in a lifetime, hopefully, an event which has just woken all of us up to that. I mean, this incremental shift won't do, like you were also mentioning. I think it needs a full strategy thinking on, like, if the world looks up at another option and everybody is saying that, I mean, we need to first of all come, all stakeholders, and how much can we capture in how much time frame. Like everybody here says, people need an option from the one large country, but there's still in short term a dependency. What has been built over decades cannot be done away with within a year or 2 years. Even India will take time to build that capacity. So I think as long as there's a roadmap and there is a plan, I think we all, industry and stakeholders, policy making, can come together to first of all define where we are, where we need to go, and probably in how much time, and including internal logistics, not just like supply chain in terms of global supply chain, even internal to India. Like I would even say, even for grocery, like we are talking more international supply chain here. But even if you were to like procure fruits and vegetables from so many farmers or so many different parts of the country, how best we can do that. I think at least we should acknowledge that this gives us a wonderful opportunity to go back to the drawing board and reassess and probably and it will take time. It may be a 3-year, 5-year, 10-year plan, but we must start the journey now.
Also, to question to Rampraveen, because this, Sumit mentioned about multimodal network. India's rail and river network are seen as underutilized pretty much, and we have had some movements there. Well, supporting infrastructure is one reason why it is. So how can that be an asset that can be used to bring about efficiencies, Rampraveen?
Yeah, so obviously, I think Ashu, the math is quite simple. There's a very significant cost arbitrage from going from road-based surface road transportation to surface rail transportation. The challenge has always been the quality of infrastructure, the availability of corridors, policy which was really driven more towards passenger traffic rather than freight traffic in the rail system. Now, I think big changes happened is with the pandemic. Obviously, passenger traffic came down substantially, and the rail traffic has just veered significantly towards cargo, for the lack of any other word. So while it's still underserved, I think many of our largest clients are now using the rail system a lot more. The breakthrough will come when the direct freight corridors, which the government is implementing, which are the direct rail freight corridors, do get fully implemented over the next 3-4 years. And once that happens, I think, Ashu, we'll see rail-based movement will becoming a real possibility within our nation at a widespread level. That will reduce the cost of logistics. I think there are numbers going around that the logistics is 12 to 14% of GDP in India. One big leverage has just been the amount of road we do compared to rail and coastal. Coastal, I think, is a lot more complex in our country. A lot more needs to be done from a policy perspective, but rail is actually, I think, the area where there is a lot more viability and line of sight. The bigger challenge, I think, is while we talk a lot about the macro issues, Ashu, I think there's a lot of work which has to be done at the micro level, right, within individual companies and organizations to strengthen supply chains as well. Right, and the big picture stuff will take time, will happen, and as I think Sumit mentioned, it could probably be done a lot faster. but the micro stuff is actually what determines business success within those constraints. And there's a lot of stuff which I think we are working with our clients actually in that space.
Okay, so let's now talk about the tech opportunities, because the supply chain of tomorrow and in fact, leveraging that and seizing the opportunity could involve a lot of tech as well. So Sumit, I'll come back to you and then I'll go to Dinesh as well on this. Supply chains, the way they are transforming by adopting the Industry 4.0 trends. So organizations with agile networks and using disruptive technologies, what lessons can Indian companies learn from some of the best practices where these have been implemented?
Absolutely, great question, Ashu, and that's something which I would say, a lot of Indian companies are actually already on that journey, and it's something which many of them are already picking up. I think the first and foremost of these is just getting absolute visibility of the supply chain movements that are actually happening in the organization. So whether your material is in the godowns, whether it's in the plant, whether it's actually movement, whether it's at your dealers, distributors, how is it moving? How quickly is the pace of movement? I think just the visibility part of things and creating, a kind of a supply chain tower kind of a view, which is, just having a bird's eye view of pretty much whatever is happening, not just in your organization, but outside as well, along with your vendors, partners, suppliers as well. I think that's something kind of a journey which people have already begun. The second I would say is, if you think about, supply chain, there are obviously two parts to it, right? There is an inbound and there is an outbound. I think all organizations have to go through that. The inbound is, pretty much a lot more in control. At least that's the way that people feel about it. But actually, that's not the case, because you are in the outbound side. Actually, where you need to send your material to. But on the inbound side, which supplier will you be finally buying from? Who will have the capacity? Who will be just in time available? I think that's something which actually lends itself to a lot of challenges in the system. So how do you actually fix both sides? Which is the inbound coming in from the vendors, as well as outbound, which is going outside as well. And then the third leg, which is now becoming increasingly accessible. In fact, I would say India is leading on that dimension, including I'm sure Rampraveen is privy to a lot of this as well. Is actually how do you leverage optimization engines to actually just balance all of these things out? I think there are natural constraints which are there. You can get only those many rakes, you can get only those many wagons, you will have only X number of trucks available at your dispatch. Demand in India is always back-ended, which is it will always come in the last 10 days of the month versus coming in the first 10 days. So how do you plan for that and optimize on that? So I think those are things where I see Indian companies actually leading the front. And lastly, I would say the fourth one, which is very important from an international perspective, how do you provide visibility not just in your organization, but actually to your customers as well? Which is one thing which India lacks a little bit, which I have seen many of the international best practices being in that towards that direction. How do you actually integrate with your customer, provide the best visibility to them in terms of where their goods are, and giving them early warning, something like an Amazon, which is very good at it, and has created a benchmark for itself. But how do you replicate it in the industrial economy and do this or replicate this across multiple forums? So that's the other thing which people are picking up. So we see movement across all of those four dimensions, and that's something which is really required to create this engine of supply chain of the future.
Okay, sorry, Dinesh, you'd raised your hands. I'm sorry, I couldn't.
Yeah, Ashwai. Yeah, sorry. I actually just wanted to comment on the previous, discussion which Rampraveen was talking about. And I don't know, maybe I'm not aware of this, because I think there's a clear intent of the government in terms of creating an internal infrastructure, right? In terms of freight corridors, the roads, the NHI construction is happening at an unprecedented pace. So we can't deny that. So things are going to improve, over the few years. But what's perhaps missing is an intent, or maybe, as I said, I'm not aware of it, is that how can India become a major transshipment hub? I mean, even today, our containers get transshipped at Sri Lanka, or Dubai, or Singapore. Why is India, if this wants to be an exporting nation, a part of a global supply chain, why can't a JNPT or a Chennai become a transshipment hub, right? So I think initiatives to that extent, in terms of the global supply chain, also are mandatory. While you do, things on the inside, but I think this kind of an intent is very important, so that you have large liners coming here who can take containers, right up to the destination and reduce the overall freight time. So this is one point which I just wanted to kind of put across. Coming to the internal challenges on the technology. So we have been investing in technology post acquisition, periodically, and I would say that we have intentionally delayed automating the entire supply chain, technology intervention, because it was pointless. When we started our 3PL operations about 10 years ago, the companies in India didn't know what is 3PL, and I'm saying with all due respect to my colleagues who are in logistics here, but even the large groups didn't know what is 3PL. We literally had to work along with them and talk about the warehouse management, the scheduling, and so on. So today we are at a stage where I think we have achieved a lot of that. So we have our warehouse management system automated, etc. But if you're talking of investing into an entire supply chain platform where I can schedule my trucks as per my staging of material, the answer is, what's the point? Because I'm going to stage my material, keep it ready, and I find out the truck is delayed for 12 hours because it's got stuck in the octroi somewhere, or or outskirts of the city somewhere. No octroi now, but outskirts of the city somewhere. So there are basic things like truck terminals, truck parking spaces not available near the industrial places, right? So for us to get a predictability of delivery, there is a huge lot of work which still needs to be done, which is as simple as organizing parking spaces for the trucks so that they can wait while they get their loading schedule. So this is what so the technology intervention and the reality on ground, they need to sync with each other. That's what my take would be. Yeah.
Okay, so it sounds a little bit like policy is there. The missionary zeal with which you do it perhaps can be missing there. Okay, Rampraveen, you've raised your hand. Sorry, please.
No, maybe just to clarify, I think just to echo what Dinesh was saying, I think my earlier comment on policy was a response to real specifically. But as I said early on, Dinesh, I think quality of assets in India, especially the port side assets, needs to be dramatically scaled up. We're not just struggling in terms of the ability to cycle products through, but as you know, even liners are often taking blank sailings past India because of some of the challenges we have on port side infrastructure. So that, I think, remains, from a global supply chain perspective, that remains a big challenge. I think the freight corridors are an initiative specific to drive probably more rail transition, and I think that also will take a few years. It's not going to happen overnight, right? But at least, as I said, there's a line of sight to a solution there. I just want to clarify, Ashu, to the question.
Sure. So also, since we're talking technology, digitization needs to be bigger. Some of the investments in tech in terms of government support needs to be bigger. So in terms of what can be done, the two sides working together, the policymakers and actual companies that need to make sure that we build on efficiencies. How would you say it, Amajan, if you can talk a little bit about, because your industry is unfolding. When I say your industry, I also include some of the related industries like EVs and others which are coming in. You're on mute, Amit.
So I think we have a long way to go on that one. So digitization. So because as far as we are concerned, we depend a lot on our partners and how they're progressing. We have to integrate our system with our partners on digitization. So I think that as we develop manufacturing capacities in India and develop capacities, we have to work along with the developing capacity on digitization and streamlining logistic chains.
Okay. Devind, in terms of the way technology is also enabling your business, and all the talk of digital, multi-channel, omni-channel, what should be the strategy to adopt these innovations in a company like yours? And also, how does it impact your company culture?
Yeah, Ashu. allow me to just connect with the previous one. There was a
Sure.
conversation happening on best
Sure.
practice, and I'll come to this one also. I think someone spoke of automating. I think it's very important that, apart from policymaker, we need to integrate ourselves with our own suppliers, at front end. And while we talk, and I'll come to omni-channel and a lot of, front end with the customer data. But like one of the best practices is that supply chain, I mean, apart from moving goods, one of the other critical point is inventory carrying cost, right? And with trends changing, like especially for us in pandemic, I told you when I spoke earlier that pack sizes changed. Like if you were buying a one cookie pack, now you're buying a pack of like 6 cookies in one, right? As a larger pack, you don't want to come out many more times. How fast can a manufacturer even respond to it? It all depends how fast you're going to share data with them. And that's where this integration comes, that imagine if the sales data is shared live, the whole production planning can be done, lead time can be cut, customer, insights on what's selling, what's not, the changes can be built in. And I think one of the things which I'm noticing is that even within the companies across, I've noticed that we have a lot of companies, people work on Excel sheet, on various MIS systems, and then there is SAP, and some report will come from some system, some MIS, we'll call it business, and I think we all miss that we need to have a single view of the data. Is everybody having the same view of the data? Because even within companies, people see different report of a data and have a different understanding. For example, between the sales team and the supply chain management team, or even a marketing team, and then they'll come together and probably then talk to a supplier. So I think SVOD, as we call single view of data, is very important. I think, and as we get scale, I think we need to remove this complexity and likelihood of data in becoming in silos. And then on top, like somebody was talking, we need to have more AI, machine learning. Like for example, I'll tell you, and unrelated to supply chain, that we learned that within a certain hour, if you send a notification to a customer, they respond better. Now, this is a digital intervention. Coming to your main question, you see this whole, physical and e-commerce, I think these terminologies will become archaic very soon. There's only omni-channel. I think we at companies have invented these terminologies. 10, 15 years back when I was in Coca-Cola, the conversation used to be, oh, modern retail has come, what will happen to Kirana Wala? Then when e-commerce came, e-commerce has come, what will happen to modern retail? I think right now there's a customer and there's a way to serve the customer. They will want to buy when they want to buy, whether they're in the car, they whether come to the store. We engage with them through a chat bot. And I think if I have to integrate this to, let's say, technology and supply chain, you see, for a company, what strength they have, they may focus on a certain channel to serve the customer or even deal with the supplier. But consumers don't think like that. I mean, they don't think. They want to buy something. If they have time, they'll come to the store. If they're busy, they'll buy it from the car, or, in the night, they'll want a delivery in the morning. So I think now it's a true omni-channel world where people will buy from a neighborhood store. You may buy, fruits from a hawker on the street. You may buy from e-commerce, from modern retail outlets. You may call on telephone. So I think technology needs to bring this whole single view of the customer. For example, we have phone numbers of 90% people who shop in our stores and 100% phone numbers of people who shop in our app. I mean, and if you marry the data, you realize how shopping journeys can be different online and offline. Or some items bought online are different from some bought offline. Now, it might sound very simple. It might sound that this is all front end, but this has huge ramification with the back end, with your suppliers. And I'll again connect back. How quickly are you able to give this feedback to your suppliers to build in this into their manufacturing production systems, come back with the right pack size or right loads, come at the right time. There's no waiting period, so you can take in the goods. I think that's very important. And I can go on and on, Ashu, but I don't want to take a conversation from the whole supply chain angle which we are talking about.
So this reminds me, on a lighter note, it just reminds me of when former India captain Azharuddin was asked a question, what's your strategy for the match? He said, well, We are looking to bat well, bowl well, and field well, and we hope to win out that. So hopefully. Sumit and Dinesh have a question. Sumit, if you can go first.
Not a question. I just wanted to add to what Devendra was just saying. I think, one of the key things on supply chain is essentially predictability. And I think one thing that we've seen over the last few years is that predictability has completely gone out. It's become an increasingly unpredictable world. The consumer demands, which used to follow some pattern, actually have started following no pattern at all, and that's where I think the original question, Ashutosh, that you had was around how do you think about digital and technology and really get AI to start interpreting some of these. And the more you can leverage data and technology to actually make this happen, bring some predictability to the entire supply chain, I think just the resilience goes up, and you can actually plan much better, and actually you can fulfill the customer demands much more as well. And I think that's what will help. Of course there is chaos, but if you can get some order into the chaos through a little bit of this, then that adds tremendous value to the overall pie as well.
Sure. So Dinesh, and then I come to you, Rampraveen.
So I think I just like to clarify my earlier comment on technology. So when I was talking of technology, I was really talking about the logistics bit of it, which is not within your control. So I completely am with Devendra and Sumit. In fact, technology intervention on demand forecasting. So we are not of FMCG. We are not so fast moving product. But we pick up our secondary offtakes, and that leads to demand forecasting, which leads to material requirement, production planning, scheduling. All that is within your control, right? But when it comes to the scheduling of the logistics of from the supply side, that's where the technology fails, because it predicts a certain way the whole delivery is going to happen, but reality is different because of the various factors we mentioned. Now, likewise, I also know that on the buy side, I am paying for a buffer. Though today I'm very happy that I'm getting on-demand supplies, right? Just-in-time inventory. But this guy is keeping a buffer stock at a location near the factory, maybe 7 days stock, and he supplies to me on a daily basis. Now, if the logistics were better, predictable, he would have perhaps kept 3 days stock, and I would have got the benefit of those 4 days. So that's what I really meant, when I spoke about technology intervention. The technology intervention certainly has helped us tremendously in terms of demand forecasting, cutting down our inventory costs, our manufacturing costs, and so on. So no two thoughts about that. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, Rampraveen, you want to come?
Yeah, probably just a couple of our 2 cents from a tech perspective, right? So I mean, the way we used to design supply chains earlier, Ashu, was very simple. Like Devendra referred to this. We used to actually try to take a very finite view of demand, a finite view of supply, and then you just work cost in between, right? And to design your logistics and supply chain system to make it as cheap as possible. That world has changed now, right? Your demand and your supply are both completely unpredictable, and that's probably a reality. You've got to design a system for it, and not in spite of it, right? And while I share and I said some of Dinesh's pain on the logistics side, and Dinesh, pardon me for using the word pain, I think tech has come a long way, right, in enabling some things. And we really see tech playing 3 plays, right? First one is visualization. I do echo what Devendra said. Just being able to visualize your supply chain is 50% of the benefit, right? And if you can do that well, I think you can make dramatic improvements. The second one is what we call optimization, which I think Sumit mentioned, saying how can you run your truck system better? How can you ensure that you have plan Bs in place? How can you manage your warehouses systems much better to try to optimize the entire end-to-end network? And the third one is what we call orchestration, which is saying, how do I use technology to manage my supply chain beyond my business, right? Into my supplier schedules, into my dealer shelf inventory. And while there are hundreds of use cases and there's no one system which solves for all use cases, I think there are strong examples of this actually beginning to work in different industries. I think one thing which has to happen is you have to buy the same way you manage it as well from a tech perspective. And that's the other big shift that you're saying. And I think Devendra or Sumit mentioned this, that a lot of our clients now are saying we want to buy and manage our supply chain in an integrated way. not have one person dealing with one imports, one person dealing with fulfillment, a third person dealing with in-plant inventory. So there's some organizational changes you have to mirror this, but I think across those three levers, Ashu, tech is, I think, making a big play, even though it may sound very cliche, right?
Yeah.
I mean, our industry loves talking tech, but I think beyond the cliche, there is real stuff. Visualization is just a big, big win.
And
Okay.
Ashu, if I can come in, if I can just add to this what Rampraveen said. So it's very important. You see, there's one team who will deal with the company on sales and demand. And then this whole model that you raise a purchase order, somebody will aggregate, make a production schedule out of it, give it to the factory, and they'll churn out. And then the whole cost angle of how to serve, cost to serve needs to be the lowest. And one within the vendor team, how quickly is the team talking to supply chain, to their own category team, that what customer behavior has changed on pack size or taste or flavor, how quickly. And imagine the number of gaps first between the retailer and the supplier. You need to have that communication at the right frequency. Then within the two teams it needs to have. So what Rampraveen said is absolutely correct, that on the demand or supply side, different teams are talking to each other. And while we assume the efficiency of connecting with each other and sharing the data or getting it worked out is perfect, but it may not be. And that's where technology needs to come and remove this inefficiency or the need of manual intervention, that you depend on people, how fast they can do it. I think this is a very important point. I just wanted to add to what Rampraveen said.
Okay, since we're talking technology, there's some questions coming in now, so we need to take some questions as well. This one comes from Laksh Behel, and the question goes, I'm just reading out the questions. Why don't we introduce more automation? As every aspect of supply chain can be automated, therefore bringing greater efficiency and improved management, inventory management, and lesser operation cost. Well, quite a bit. But Sumit, would you like to give a broad
absolutely.
sense of that?
No, I think it's a great question, and in fact, I think the last 5-10 minutes we've been discussing that how organizations are actually moving, from the traditional manual Excel-based ways of working to actually now more automated ways of working, whereby there is increased visibility. I think a lot of organizations have crossed the hurdle of being in the archaic world to versus at least having good visibility and transparency. I think the next phase, which is the optimization phase, I think that's the one which becomes even more important, which is how do you leverage a bit of this automation and data capture to actually do analytics on top of it to actually optimize and reduce the inventory and logistics cost. I think the one thing which plays havoc here is really the unpredictability around things, which is in the perfect world where that the customer is going to come here tomorrow and buy X item, I think you can plan fantastically well. But when you are always at this unpredictability around that whether the customer will actually come or not, if he or she comes, what will he buy, and hence what do you need to stock. I think that's where some of this really long-term trends and data capture actually starts playing in a big and very, very important role. So it's essentially very, very important. I think people are moving in that direction, and that's where a lot of efficiency and costs are coming down. But still, a lot more needs to be done to make sure that this part touches every nook and corner of the supply chain and not just certain sections where this is right now being deployed. Dinesh, I think you want to say something.
So I just, I think that automation has two parts, right? So the software part, I think we've been discussing for the last 15 minutes. But the hardware part, let me give you an extreme example. If I go to a Panasonic factory in Japan, there are no human beings carrying any material, right? It's all picked up by the, robotic trolleys, taken to the right workstation where it gets assembled. And the final product is then again picked up by a robo, moved onto a chain, and it goes down to the final warehouse and stuff. Now that's the extreme part of it. So I think it's always, the reality is always, based on obviously the cost benefit, right? So in our experience today in our warehouses, we still believe that on pallet stocking and increasing horizontally, which means you keep contracting or leasing out more space is cheaper in most of the cities rather than doing a vertical stacking where it is difficult for a human being to reach. That means, beyond, let's say, seven carton stacking, 7 or 8 carton stacking. But increasingly in some of the cities, and I'm talking of our company, where it's not important to have a warehouse inside the city location. It can be outside a pin code, outside the main city boundaries. But increasingly in some of the cities, vertical stacking is becoming feasible, or I would say cost beneficial. Now, so as we go in for vertical stacking, we will need to start investing, or we have started investing into hardware, where you actually have the stackers, and the forklifts of a larger height, picking up and then delivering the material where it has to be. So I think it's all a factor of cost and benefit. As long as there is labor available, which is cheaper. I'm sorry, I'm using these words, but that's a fact, right? The labor which is cheaper, you will not invest in technology. So yeah, what you will invest is in a warehouse management system, so that this guy knows where to go and pick up that material in an efficient way. But you'll still do it manually. That's what it is. Yeah.
Okay, we also have a question from Akshay Dalvi, and this comes. Consumers are looking for same-day shipping, which is becoming the new normal. What's your perspective on this trend? Deven, would you like to take this? You hear from such customers almost every day, I would imagine.
Oh, absolutely, Ashu. And actually, we've come a long way, from 5 years back, 7 days delivery or 1 week. I think today practically everything is same day. We ourselves, if we take an order till like 5:36, it will be delivered on the same day. And now you see there's this new war of 10-minute at least.
Yeah.
Depending on how much money you have to burn, you will have 10-minute delivery. And imagine an ordinary bill size of a grocery bill in India is roughly 350 rupees. And the unit economics, delivery cost, you can only alone charge 75 rupees, which will work 20-25%, which is not the margin in food, but definitely the customers aren't complaining, right? They are getting it. So I think customers are not ready to wait. We live in a on-demand economy where people want it now means like right now. We've moved on from content where, we used to wait for one Mahabharat or one serial which would come once in a week, and we would wait sitting. And now, whether it's 2 in the morning, 5 in the morning, where you stopped your Netflix channel, you start from there. So we've got used to getting what we want at that moment. That's what the mobile and data has done. And I think same is happening on delivery side. Increasingly, every company is working towards making it shorter and shorter. A couple of categories we deliver in half an hour at Bombay and even in Calcutta, Delhi for Nature's Basket. And like 2 hours is on the outside which width you will deliver, because it becomes a norm. And even if the customer does not need that product, or let's say need that category to be used in the homes that day, but the fact is they just need it in front of them. You'll be surprised, even apparel, which is not food, which you're not going to be probably using the very same day, the demand, even that, because we also sell apparel, we also sell television panels, we also sell general merchandise, but food being dominant, you'll be surprised. That's where the whole model is moving. So absolutely, same day delivery is going to be the norm, and companies have to figure out the cost and the business model to deliver profitably.
So then the next question from Utsav Rao Dongre becomes very important, because some of this has to be executed as well. And Utsav asks, what steps is the logistics industry taking to get quality, talented manpower in future? Amit Jain, if you can take that question.
I think I am not typically from logistic industry, but
that's why I said that.
Yeah. So I think either Sriram can take that question. Okay. He will be able to answer in a better position.
Okay, maybe Rampraveen, would you like to take that?
Sure. So I think supply chain and logistics obviously has historically not been the greatest talent magnet in our country, right? I think logistics even lesser than supply chain. Right. I often say this, that we're all logisticians by accident, not by design. Right. So, so that I think is to some extent reality. But I think I think that's changing, right? So one, I think what logistics, there is a lot more focus now on supply chain as and stream of learning, and I think you can see that today with the number of courses and academic, instruction which is available around the space of supply chain. I think more importantly, I think what companies are doing right now, logistics companies themselves are doing, is investing significantly more in talent, right? Talent around specific capability areas like technology, optimization, but also talent around areas like customer experience, right? And to Devendra's point, when you're looking at this kind of 10-minute delivery and so on, it is really important to be able to get a lot more talent in the last mile in the way they serve customers and engage with them. So I think there's no easy way out of it. I think obviously we are doing the more conventional things, recruiting people, investing a lot more in talent development. But I think logistics companies have to really up the ante internally in terms of how much money they spend, right, and how much time they spend actually on skilling people. And that's been a big focus area, at least I know for us in MLL. We really moved the bar in terms of measuring talent hours, training hours. We've kind of, I think during the pandemic, quadrupled the amount of areas in which we are training and upskilling people. So a lot of that is self-help, unfortunately, Ashwin. It's not, the talent market is still very limited. I would just say one thing to Devendra's earlier point. I think you either have to figure out the economics yourself, Devendra, or you have to find somebody else who's ready to burn the money.
No, absolutely. No, absolutely. That you, on the customer side, there's no question if the whole world is moving in that direction. And to add to what Rampraveen said, I think internally companies are realizing that supply chain is becoming more and more critical to success, to serve the customer. So on talent, I'm also noticing like people getting a rotation and getting to do a stint, people from sales, marketing also. So it's not just that you have to look for only supply chain people. I think people to be rotated within the roles. I'm seeing a lot of that happen. That even myself being from sales marketing in Coca-Cola nationally, I took up the route to market job, was all in line. And if you see retailers, for them, it's a supply chain is the most important. What is buy, move, sell? You're not producing goods yourself. You're selling somebody else's goods. So everything is supply chain. You're storing it in your store. You may call it a store or storing area, and you're moving it, delivering it, and you're procuring it. So frankly, retail is supply chain. So the talent in retail for supply chain is absolutely, is in high demand.
Okay, so Amit, the other question now, let's get back. So we've taken some of the viewer questions as well. Now, how do we plan for leveraging the integrated supply chain planning process so that we can collaborate better with some of the tactical and key suppliers? In your industry, you mentioned about the challenges faced in the last 12 to 18 months. How would you take that? For the entire supply chain planning process, how do we better have tactical collaboration with the key suppliers? And for your industry, that is quite important to understand.
Yeah, so that tactical collaboration is absolutely very important and becoming very critical in our industry. So now we are working we work in various diverse geographies. The cost used to be the prime driver, but now as we earlier deliberated that Devendra pointed out, the risk and the cost are the two parameters which you have to manage. And to move the predictability of our project implementation and project programs. So now we are working with various our partners. So which particular geographies will be catered from which of their manufacturing locations and plants, and those our supplier base and our partners, those who have multiple geographical bases, we are trying to develop the alliances so that we can address our geographical demands accordingly. So that's how we are partnering, and we are working our partners to establish their bases in India and other geographies so that we can partner and have alliance and address our global requirements accordingly.
And if I may ask for a follow-up question, also in terms of the larger goal that India has set, because that's a national agenda, it's beyond one company. How are companies partnering to ensure that 450 gigawatts target could be met, the long-term target?
So actually that is happening. So that is happening on both on technology and manufacturing front. So we are encouraging all our key partners to have their bases in India, so that or having technology transfer or manufacturing license from them, that we can set up the bases in India and can cater to the Indian requirements. So working that so that we can bring the technology and their manufacturing bases in India. And even we are seeing more and more, even Chinese players are coming up and setting up their bases in India. A lot of European players coming and setting up their bases in India. So discussion is going on. And once that happens, we'll be able to address the Indian demands as well through those partnerships.
Okay, sure. Okay, now also to something that's a lot of buzzword. You hear a lot of that, and I'm not sure how much of that is happening in the Indian context. And it'll be very heartening to hear about the issues around sustainability, green, and all that. Dinesh, if I can request you to give a big picture view of some of those factors that, if at all, they are part of the planning for tomorrow's supply chains.
I have some extreme views on this, Ashu.
Sure.
When we put the brand Panasonic on any product, it's supposed to be green, right? So it's not supposed to contain any of the the hard metals, RoHS compliance, and supposed to be manufactured in plants which are running not 100% but partially on green energy. Now this is a debate that question that came up when Panasonic acquired Anchor in 2007, because none of our products were compliant. Obviously, for obvious reasons, none of our plants were compliant. It was family-owned, managed company. But we've taken a practical approach to it, because today, very honestly, today a consumer doesn't care whether your product is green, whether your switch is green or not. Right? He doesn't care about it. So we've got a set of products which are for the mass market, and we have a set of products which are obviously Panasonic branded, which are for the for the niche or the premium market. So we have kept a balance when it comes to the products in terms of compliance, let's say on the RoHS compliance, for example. But what we have ensured is obviously all our plants are 100% compliance in terms of their emissions, and we are increasing our sustainability achievements year on year by increasing the power generation. So all our plants have now rooftop solar generation. We are also setting up captive plants to increase our use of solar energy for our manufacturing purpose. We have changed all our machines, which are old machines. We've changed them to ones with more electronic control, which are obviously lower power consuming. And obviously everything else that you can bring in terms of the manufacturing efficiency, so that the whole cycle time cuts down. So that's the way we are approaching sustainability in our own way. Of course, internally we have a target that by the year 2030, we would be fully sustainable. That means we will generate all the power that we are consuming. Because obviously all the other aspects, we are not a very high power consuming industry, but whatever power we're consuming, we will generate it our own self. So yeah, that's our bit on the sustainability. Now, if you ask me that whether 10 years later all our products will be green, I think I'll still have a question mark, because as a company, I think we remain committed to the bottommost segment of the market as we are to the premium most segment of the market. So I wouldn't be able to answer that yet.
Sure. Sumit, you raised a hand. Please go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is again something which is close to my heart as well. So at the entire portion around shift to green, and this year we even saw at Glasgow, Honorable Prime Minister committing to net zero by 2070. I know it's a long-term time frame, but it's clearly a step in that direction. What we are increasingly seeing, Ashu, is that companies are increasingly increasing their emphasis towards this aspect. They may not be 100% there, but I think if they are at 10% today, the aim is to move to 20, the aim is to move to 30 beyond that. And it's not just a 2050, 2060 vision, but it's also something that they want to do by 23, 25, 30 in that time frame. Now, for a lot of these companies, logistics and supply chain actually forms a part of scope 3 emissions. Scope 1 being their own, scope 2 being the power source that they use, and scope 3 being the entire supplier landscape that they're actually catering to. And increasingly, as companies resolve the scope 1 and scope 2 measures in terms of what they can do internally, the focus is actually shifting towards scope 3. And that's where at least we are saying, while earlier, cost used to be the only agenda point while deciding between two suppliers, then came cost and reliability. Now it's cost, reliability, and carbon emissions, which is coming as the third front in terms of, selecting partners. Is it the only thing? No, not right now, at least. But is it, now starting to becoming more and more important and form a part of decision-making process? Definitely, yes. I think it's an agenda which is being pushed forward, not just because it is important, but it actually also leads to cost benefits. Frankly, someone from a logistics provider is burning less fuel and being less carbon emittive, obviously then helps them also be lower on cost. So I think, all in all, it's a win-win situation. So right now, people are trying to identify these win-win situations, work on those, and clearly move ahead in that direction.
Okay, Devendra, I suspect you to take leave because you have something urgent to attend to. Would you like to?
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Sumit. Thanks, Dinesh.
Okay. Thank you so much. Sorry, we just took a few minutes extra, so we'll not hold you back anymore.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thanks so much for being with us, Devendra.
Thank you.
Rampraveen, you'd raise your hand, so please go ahead.
Just to add, I think, to what Sumit already mentioned, I think the ESG agenda is becoming more and more important. I mean, among our top 100 clients, I would say that ESG now is a definite discussion item in the top 4 or 5 asks. Right? Now, bear in mind that sustainability cannot come in the way of good economics. Right? So I think, nobody's going to pay you a significant premium to solve a sustainability challenge. But I think where we've been able to find ways through it, Ashu, it's been very successful. So last November, we launched an electric vehicle-based last mile delivery service called EDEL. In less than a year now, we're in 14 cities. We are over 700 vehicles. Right. And we have pretty high occupancies, right? I mean, we've had 90% plus occupancy. The trick has been we've been able to equate per package prices almost equal to ICE. Right. But I think if we can solve those things in tandem, I think the uptick is very large. And frankly, I think, in the next 10 years, I think it's going to become a larger and larger part of the discussion, because everybody, as Dinesh mentioned or Sumit mentioned, they're going to get through scope 1 and scope 2, if not fully. At least they're going to make enough progress to start saying, now I need to look at scope 3. Right, and so it is becoming a real item, and I just want to reaffirm that because of what we see among our clients.
Okay, and Sumit, so some of the key pillars of thinking afresh and leveraging that India opportunity, what would you think should be that? You mentioned about some of the key announcements, the PLIs and all that, but that pillars is what I'd like to understand.
So Ashu, I think, I would say there are, 2 parts to the pillars. I think there is something which the industry needs to do. And then, of course, there are a bunch of things that the government needs to do. I think if I was to put the 2 and 2 together, I think, 3 things come to my mind. I think how do you, drive this imbalance that is there right now with, production and consumption? And how do you, incentivize, the manufacturing to move to the right set of locations in terms of, just having a better balance in? That's one. Second, I think, few of my friends spoke about, just the imbalances across several legs of our supply chain, whether it's ports, whether it's, the pressure points where especially the multimodal changes happen, where, the rail shifts to road or the road shifts to rail. How do you augment capacity there? That's second. Third, I would say, how do you integrate, some of the global supply chain elements into the local supply chain as well, which is around how do you, have global suppliers, global customers, and, a unique manufacturing footprint in India all come together to create just an ease of movement across the entire thing. I think those three are really, really critical elements of, ensuring that the India dream of becoming, the future supply chain destination, future supplier of the entire world, I think will become critical as well. There are many more, I can go on and on, but I would say these are the three most critical ones for me.
Okay, so we're just about running out of time. Rampraveen, any closing remarks? Would you like to say a few words, please?
I think so. Firstly, thanks, Ashutosh. I won't repeat everything which Sumit has mentioned. Right? I think all the other panelists have mentioned. I think we're in some ways we're in the best of times and the worst of times. The best of times because opportunity is rich in a medium to long term view. The worst of times because each one of us is dealing with untold disruption and volatility on a day-to-day basis. Right? I think most of the panelists have talked about all the big things. The one thing which I would probably add, in addition to what's come up, is that one big area which really needs shaping, I think, is formalization in the sector. A lot of things which we still talk about, lack of predictability in trucks, drivers, resource availability for the sector. A lot of that is actually because we still have a crying lack of formalization in our sector. Right, and ultimately, if we cannot solve for that, I think consistency is going to be difficult to achieve. Right, and the lack of consistency, without consistency, I think we lack credibility on the India story, whether it's on local consumption or global, global supply. So that's one thing which I think is just a call out I would do in addition to what I think Dinesh, Amit, Sumit, what we all discussed earlier.
Sure, I love the way you put it. Best of times. So Charles Dickens wouldn't have thought of, putting these words for the supply chain industry for sure. I'm very sure of that. Thank you indeed, gentlemen, for being with us. A wonderful conversation, and so important that some of these thoughts are put into action and the policymakers and the industry work together to hopefully leverage the opportunity for the country. Thank you for being with us on this important conversation.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Ashish.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.